Somebody asked me one day, they said, Brother Cornwell, aren't you a busy pastor? And I said, I am. They said, well, how in the world do you manage to fit Bible studies, as many as you teach, into your schedule? And I simply answered in this way. I don't fit Bible studies into my ministry. Bible studies is my schedule. I fit everything else into my schedule. And when you teach Bible studies for 45 years, it has to be who you are and it has to be your schedule. I remember when I was just a young preacher, many of you may know that I'm a graduate chemical engineer and also a biomedical engineer. When I got called to preach, it was difficult to accept the call to preach because all preachers that I knew was poor as Job's turkey. And being an engineer was my way out of poverty. And so I started evangelizing in 1972. The first year that I evangelized full-time, I made a total of $980. The second year that I evangelized full-time, I made $2,200. And the third year, I finally was able to make a living. I made $4,400 the third year I evangelized. But the third year, I made a decision that I was going to preach a revival for pay, and that I was going to donate a revival to a home missions pastor. And I had did that for a number of free revivals, and I would preach a revival in which I'd get paid, and then I'd donate a week to a home missions pastor. And I paid all my expenses. I left an offering with the pastor. We paid his utilities. We paid for all the food. Didn't cost the pastor anything for that week of revival. Well, I was preaching in Yuba City, California, and had a tremendous revival. And my next revival that I was going to preach for free or donate was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I had just enough money, Sister Cornwell, I had just enough money to drive from Yuba City, north of Sacramento, to Tulsa if we didn't stop. So we drove from Yuba City to Tulsa. We didn't have money to stop for food. All we had enough money for was for gasoline to get to Tulsa. And so when I got to Tulsa, I was preaching in southwest Tulsa at a little home mission church. It was a house that they had converted into a church. And the pastor there had borrowed a mobile home there next to the church. And it was 70 foot long, had no skirting on it. It had the old trailer house steps. It was right in the middle of a mowed field. And we'd walk from the trailer over to the little house church. And the pastor was as poor as Sister Cornwell and I, and he said, now, I can't let you preach this revival for free. I said, no. I said, we said we would donate you a revival. And I said, not only would we donate you a revival, but we're going to pay for all the food this week. And at the end of the week, we're going to leave you an offering. And he said, well, I feel bad about that. He said, let me take up an offering. I said, no, you cannot take up an offering. He said, well, what if we just put 2 baskets on the altar bench, and whatever comes in those plates will be yours? I said, okay, I'll agree to that, as long as you don't ask for money, you don't ask for an offering. So he put 2 wicker baskets on a little altar bench, about 6 foot long, right in front of the little makeshift pulpit. And so we started preaching that revival. At the end of the week, on Sunday night, I noticed that there were 4 $1 bills in those wicker baskets. And so we took the pastor and his wife, my wife and I and our children. We went to McDonald's and we ate a hamburger, a small Coke, and a small French fry. I mean, when you don't have any extra money. So he said, well, let's go by the church. I think there was some money in the offering basket. So he was the only one that had a key to the building. He had locked the church up. So we unlocked the church. When we turned the lights on and we started walking in the aisle, we both stopped. Both of those wicker baskets was piled up with money. It wasn't like one lump sum. It was like he had passed the baskets at a general conference. It was fives, tens, ones, 20s, 50s, $100 bills in those baskets. Both baskets were just piled high. Well, we made a beeline to the altar, and we took those plates. I said, these baskets are mine. We agreed that whatever came in these baskets would be mine. So we sat down on the floor, and we poured all the money out, and we counted out the money. It was more money than I had made in all the previous revivals in one lump sum. So I gave the pastor half of it, and I took the other half. And I said, I feel led to go another week. And so we went a second week. In the second week, there was only $2 bills in those offering baskets. We went to McDonald's. We ate a quarter pounder with cheese, large fry, and a large Coke. Man, we ate high on the hog. And we made a beeline back to the church. We almost knocked each other over to unlock the door. We walked in. Both baskets was piled up the second week. And I poured the money out on the floor, counted it out, gave him half of it, and I took half. And I said, let's go another week. So we went another week. And for 5 weeks, every night, every Sunday night, those baskets would be piled up. But I never will forget the third week of that revival. We was in the trailer house. It didn't have any utensils, no food, nothing. It was just an empty trailer house. And one afternoon, there came a knock on the door. So my wife and I, we went to the door, and there was a little man there. He was about 5'7", 5'8", salt and pepper hair, kind of thin. He had an old charcoal gray suit, a thin, real thin black tie and a white shirt. I noticed his shoes, they were clean, but they weren't polished. And we looked at him, and he said, "Are you Brother Cornwell?" And I said, "I am." He said, "I have a gift for you." And he handed me a brown paper bag, folded over, and he handed it to me. And he said, "This is your gift." And I reached and I took that brown paper bag and I handed it to Sister Cornwell, and I looked back. And while we're standing in the door looking at him, he vanished. He vaporized right in front of our eyes. I ran out of the trailer down to the ground. My wife, her knees had buckled. She started crying, and she said, "Oh my God, oh my God." She said, "What am I holding in my hand?" I said, "I don't know, let's look and see." So we opened that paper bag, and there was something in freezer paper. And I removed the tab off of that freezer paper, and there was 2 porterhouse T-bone steaks, about 1.5 to 2 inches thick. It still had the bone fragments on it. It had not been cleaned. They had just been cut off of a cow. And my wife, she said, "What do we do with them?" And I said, I think we're supposed to cook them. And she looked under the sink in the cabinets and found a cast iron skillet. And so all we had was that cast iron skillet. We had those little white plastic forks and knives. And my wife had bought a loaf of bread, sliced bread. So we had that sliced bread. She cooked those 2 porterhouse steaks in that cast iron skillet. And we sat down, and we was actually able to cut that steak with that little white plastic knife. And as I ate that steak, the taste of that steak was so unique. It was unbelievable. And I heard the Lord say, I will supply all of your needs according to my riches and glory. And I didn't think anything about it except when we went to church that Sunday night and the offering baskets were piled up, I realized that an angel was putting that money in those plates. Every time since then, we've had a financial crisis. One of the financial crises we had, we built our new building, and we had a $100,000 balloon payment at the end of the year. And we had saved up money every month, and we was going to have the $100,000. The bank called me and said, Pastor, I hate to tell you, but we're going to have an extra $50,000. I said, but you told me we was going to only have to have $100,000. He said, I know, but your debt is so big, we're going to have $150,000. So I went to the church and I said, I need an extra $50,000. We got 30 days to raise the $50,000. So we took up pledges, had pledges just enough to get the extra $50,000. Well, I walked out of church on Sunday night after we had taken up the offering, and I had the extra $50,000. And one of the main men of our church walked up to me and he said, Pastor, he said, you know I made a big pledge. And I said, yeah. I said, you made a $3,000 pledge. He said, well, I just want you to know I'm not going to pay it. I said, but you made a pledge. He said, I know it, but he said, I'm not paying it. And he walked off. So I'm sitting in my truck, and I started weeping. And I said, God, I've never missed a bill in my life. And he said, I'm not going to have the $150,000. And all of a sudden, the taste of that steak came to my mouth. And about that time, a car pulled on our driveway. It was midnight now. And one of the oldest ladies in our church, she pulled up in front of my truck and she got out. She had her house coat on. She had those pink curlers in her hair. She was a mess. She had, I still remember her slippers and her big toes sticking out of those slippers. And she said, Pastor, and I got out and I said, what are you doing here at midnight? She said, the Lord woke me up. I said, what do you mean the Lord woke you up? She said, the Lord woke me up and said my pastor was crying on the parking lot. And she said, I had to come down here. And she said, the Lord told me to give you something. I said, what? She said, here. She handed me a check and opened that check up. It was for $3,000. I said, where did you get $3,000? She said, Pastor, that's my life savings. I said, the Lord told me. That she was in need. And all I could do was taste that steak in my mouth. And I said, give me that check. And I took that check and I took her by the hand and I raised her hand up and I raised that check up. I said, Lord, record this check. Record it in her name. And I put that check back in her hand and I hugged her and I said, if the Lord can wake you up at midnight and tell you your pastor's crying on the parking lot, everything's going to be all right. And when I went home that night, the next morning, people started dropping by the church. They were putting $10 bills on the door, $20 bills on the door, $50 bills on the door. And at 10 o'clock, when it got time to go to the bank, $3,030 had come in under that door. My God shall supply all of your needs. And every time Sister Cornwell and I have faced a financial crisis, that steak. I've eaten steak in Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, Europe. I've eaten steak in almost every state in the Union, trying to find a steak that tastes like that. I've never found it. But every time there is a great financial need, the taste of that steak comes back. I want to tell you something. God knows where you're at. He knows exactly what your need is. And he said, I will supply. If you'll trust me, I will supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory.